I'm going to be talking about a wiki project in Wikidata. There's three kinds of people that I want to reach with this message. One is Wikipedians, Wikimedians, Wikidata editors. You already know what a wiki project is, and I'm going to do some insider talk, so you should watch it if you want to talk Wikipedian to Wikipedian about wiki projects. Two, if you're at a knowledge center, like a university or a research institute or a museum, and you're interested in sharing data or content in the Wikimedia platform in Wikidata, then I'm going to explain how you can do this through the wiki project model. Three, I'm going to be giving examples out of the field of medicine. If you care about medical content on Wikipedia or in the free and open media space, then you might care about this because I think this represents an innovation in medicine. How do you do? My name is Lane Raspberry. I'm Wikimedian in residence at the School of Data Science at the University of Virginia. I, with a team of other people, put together something called WikiClinicalTrials. In this video, I'm going to say what we did and why we did it. A lot of the implications about what we did are in a complementary academic paper. You can check it out, read it online. It's called Wiki Project Clinical Trials for Wikidata. So that's a different perspective. In this video, I'm going to say more about why you should care about this paper. How does it affect things other than clinical trials? So what we actually did in this project, two things. We set up a wiki project. A wiki project is an online forum in the Wikimedia platform where people of like mind who want to collaborate meet each other and discuss how to achieve common goals. So we set up a wiki project for Wiki Project Clinical Trials. We also did a data import. We pulled free and open data sets from open repositories, imported them into the Wikidata platform, and now that it's in the wiki platform, it has certain implications. It can reach new people at lower cost to them. It's much easier to access. Plus, we can enrich the data in different ways. Things I'm going to talk about, I'm going to say how we set up this wiki project and what a wiki project is. I'm going to say once the content was set up in the wiki platform, what did it mean to have this integrated in the wiki platform? That is, what can we do with the data when it's in the wiki ecosystem as compared to where the data was in the free and open repository where it sit previously and where most people would access it from. I'm going to say something about the curation process in Wikidata, which is how we changed the original data set. We enriched it, we processed it, we curated it so that it's new. We mix new data with old, and the data's something more than what it was when we began. And I'm going to finish by saying where can we go next after we've done all these things. If you're part of the wiki community and you're a regular editor, you already know what a wiki project is. Wiki projects have been around since Wikipedia, since almost the beginning, early 2000s. Wiki projects change a bit in the context of Wikidata, whereas in Wikipedia, when people gathered in a wiki project, and wiki projects are often thematic, like one for every academic subject. There's one for chemistry and literature and history and these kinds of things. There's also geographical wiki projects, so one for every country in the world. Every kind of hobby that somebody would have, there's equivalent wiki projects in the Wikimedia platform. Now, when you're talking about wiki projects in Wikipedia, people typically want to talk about sources or what are priority articles to edit, or how should people do fact checking, or what sources should we make sure are well represented in the wiki ecosystem. In Wikidata, things have changed a bit because in Wikidata, people often talk about what kind of data sets are appropriate to import, and often we don't have sources that we can check and critique in the same way that we do with editing Wikipedia articles. There's more editorial decisions that get made in Wikidata, such as what constitutes a data model when we're combining data in different ways. How should we present it to our users, either by structuring the data in certain ways or by setting up queries so that they can pull the data out of Wikidata. So a lot of experienced wiki editors are unfamiliar with how to set up a wiki project in Wikidata. And I'll tell you how we did it. Now, this wasn't really an innovation on our part, not this part of it, but in Wiki Project Clinical Trials, the one that we set up, I think it's rather tidy. And if you look at it, I think it's a fine model for how other people can set up their wiki projects. What it contains, so there's a landing page. You search for Wiki Project Clinical Trials in Wikidata, you find it. There's a landing page that orients the person to how to use the wiki project. We have a data model page, so a list of the properties that people should be discussing when they're talking about clinical trials. Clinical trials happens to be about medical research. So if you're doing medical research, you want information like what disease or medical condition are you examining, what kind of drug or other therapy are you researching, who was doing the research, where was the research done, how many people were involved in the research, who are the key players, the leaders of the research. So all of these things constitute a data model. Someone can set up a data model for anything. So some other popular wiki projects, they have data models for the art at a museum or individual exhibits or these kinds of things, or events or biographies, whatever you like. But there has to be some rules. When you're talking about a thing, the data model is the list of the data values that you have to describe to others what that thing is. So we have a data model page. Along with the data model page, we have a query page. Wikidata uses a query system called Sparkle. Sparkle is not a human readable language. Someone needs to learn this computer code if they want to pull content out of Wikidata. We do want to make it easy for visitors to the page who don't know Sparkle or don't know a query language to be able to pull the content out of Wikidata. And for that purpose, the query page sets up example queries. And the point of the example queries are to put ideas in people's heads about what information they can get out, and so that they can change words in our example queries to get information that's of interest to them. So on our clinical trial page, we have queries. For example, show me all the clinical trials about Zika fever. And if you're not interested in that particular disease, you just change the term Zika to whatever disease you're interested in, and then you can get all the clinical trials for that condition. So we have a list of queries on the query page. Wiki projects and Wikidata, they have this, and they help new users find content more easily. We have a page in the Wiki project for curation. And these are guidelines or rules or suggestions for how somebody can clean up, process, or enrich the data following the methods that we use to clean this up in our wiki project. Data curation is a complicated thing. It depends on, not complicated isn't the correct word. It's just that people can do it in a lot of different ways depending on what kind of data you're dealing with. And if somebody points out to you how they're cleaning up or processing data, it's easy to explain, it's easy to be shown. But if somebody is completely disoriented and they don't know the field and don't know how it happens in that particular field, then they may be lost and they need some suggestions. So it's hard to give step-by-step instructions for how to process data. As an example, if you're talking about clinical trials data, you process disease data in one way. And if you're trying to give a biographical profile of the researchers who are doing the research, the biographical data gets processed in another way. So you have personal data, you can have organization data, the organization that managed the research, the disease data, the drug data, something different, and each one of these needs to be curated in its own way. It's hard to give a methodology for every situation, but just give some suggestions on the curation page. We give some credits to people who contributed to the project. When you're dealing with a data set, dozens, hundreds of people contribute as well as organizations. Try to give some credit on your wiki project page. And then we have a discussion page. And this is something that's a key feature of the wiki ecosystem. Every time you have questions, you can drop down your questions. You can have people respond to it, strangers on the internet who also care about these things. And there's a public permanent archive of all the discussions about this data on the wiki project. So all of these things together are a wiki project. If you're looking for a model for setting up a wiki project, then you can point to Wiki Project Clinical Trials as something that's well documented because, as I said, there's a paper that described what we did. You can cite that or you can follow the method as is useful to you. Something else we did that is unprecedented or rather uncommon at least, I don't see this very much, is we externalized the results of the queries that we have for the wiki project in a snapshot that we stored in a Jupyter notebook. So the advantage to doing this is that when somebody queries Wikidata, The results that it give are the results of Wiki as it looks at this point in time. But Wikipedia is the encyclopedia that anyone can edit. Wikidata, similarly, anyone can edit. So as people add more clinical trials and as people further curate the data, the query results that you would get for give me some list of arbitrary clinical trials, that's going to be different 6 months from now when more clinical trials come out. So if you set up a Jupyter Notebook and you put your queries in a Jupyter Notebook and you put the appropriate plugins so that your Jupyter Notebook knows how to get this information out of Wikidata, then you can set up the queries, push a button, and get a snapshot of Wikidata results at any given point in time. The reason why you should care about this is because supposing you have a project where you're institutionally engaged in contributing content to Wikidata, and you wanted to demonstrate how Wikidata looked before you did your project and how Wikidata looked after you did your project. You can copy our Jupyter Notebook as a template, do your own queries for your own project, and this is the way that you can show progress or results with your own wiki projects at your own institution. So if you're going to be doing data import or data integration into Wikipedia, this is what you show. So that's the part that's, I think, is interesting to wiki community members. Now I'm going to explain more about why what we did would matter to somebody who's in the field of clinical research or somebody who's thinking about engaging with Wikidata in any other capacity, in case you're thinking about doing a similar project based on this as a model. So when you contribute to Wikidata, the thing that you get for free out of a data import is integration with the Wiki platform. That's the Wikimedia platform, that's the Wikidata platform. So what do I mean by this? When we were importing clinical trial records, for example, let's say there was a clinical trial that happened at a particular university. If the clinical trial record said that it happened at that university, then we can import that directly into Wikidata. And through other kinds of queries, you can say, okay, I know that clinical trials happened at this university. What are some other research projects that happened at that university? And if you run the query, show me all the research projects at the university, you get the clinical trials that you just added, but for free, you get the integration of all the other data sets that anyone else has ever imported to Wikidata associated with that university. Okay, something else you get. There's a project, this is just an example, a project called Wikisite in Wikidata, and in the Wikisite project, we imported scholarly publishing metadata for research papers. So academic papers of the sort that would be published at a university. So if you are looking at a particular university and you want to know its output, you can say, okay, now we know it has these clinical trials at the university, but we also know it has these papers at the university. It also has these professors or researchers or people publishing at the university. There's all these other characteristics. So when you're integrated into the wiki platform, you can start to ask different kinds of questions that you wouldn't have been able to ask otherwise. So instead of saying, show me all the clinical trials for a given disease, you could say, show me all the clinical trials that happened at a university that has under this many faculty, so a smaller university. That's not something that you could do with the original data set because you need other data sets that the wiki ecosystem has that would not be part of any conventional package of distribution for a clinical trials data set. Some other things that you get from uploading to the wiki platform, well, this query system that I've mentioned several times before. So, for example, we pulled this data set out of clinicaltrials.gov. It's a US government website, and there is a search feature on clinicaltrials.gov, and it has different form fields. You can say what kind of trial you're looking for, what conditions you're looking for, all these other characteristics. But in Wikidata, you have free-form query within your browser. So while anyone could have downloaded the data set, installed it in their own querying database, run their own queries on it, or done queries within the original government website, within Wikidata, you can run any query that you can imagine, like the strange query that I just mentioned about show me research projects that happened at an institution or in a community of a certain size. So it's completely freeform, whatever question you can think to ask. You can ask odd questions. Show me the clinical trials where the principal investigator is also known to play an instrument or has won an award. So that's non-conventional, but when we're making biographical profiles in Wikipedia, these biographical articles contain whatever kind of media we can find on people, and all this gets structured in Wikidata. You can do this as well. Last thing I'll mention about what you get for free in the Wiki platform is this possibility of discussion. So if you want to talk to somebody about any aspect of the data set, it would be, you have limited options to do this with the original source. That is, there's no discussion forum in the original government archive that's distributing this data set, but everywhere in the Wiki platform, you can always make a public, permanent note of any comment that you have. You can say, I like this data, I question this data, I have comments about this data. You can talk about the different queries that you're setting up and discuss with other people if they're open. Sometimes people will come immediately and respond to these kind of things. You can always ask in the Wiki community, hey, can somebody look at my question and give me comments? Or some of these questions, they'll just sit for months or sometimes even years waiting for somebody else to see them. In Wiki, it's okay to have these pending questions that just sit there until and unless somebody's interested in responding. And there's a public record of you having asked this. So that's what you get for free if you do a data import to Wikidata. If you put more work into it, okay, if you want to enrich or process or curate the data further, then Wikidata has processes that it broadly applies to all kinds of data sets. You can bring these to your project and you can start applying them. The kinds of processing that get done routinely, and people can put these into other categories as they like. The Wiki community is still discussing among itself how it wants to talk about these things, but I would call them entity disambiguation. I'll discuss that one first. Language translation, which is something kind of odd that the Wiki community does, but it has this commitment to equity and diversity and making information accessible to all kinds of people. And also you can bring in new data sets, remix them. It's a bit more than integration because you're making a creative and editorial decision to match data so that you get kind of new information or information being applied in new ways. Entity disambiguation, what does this mean? If you have a research project and the original record says that the principal investigator or the leader of the research project was J. Smith, that's considered to be an ambiguous record. You don't know if it's John Smith or Jane Smith or any other kind of Smith. You don't know what institution they're affiliated with maybe, or if there's multiple people by that name at the same institution. It's a record that's ambiguous until and unless someone uses Wikidata structured data features to connect it to another record and clearly tell you it's this particular person uniquely identified who did this research. There's disambiguation workflows in Wikidata that people can follow. And again, it's hard to explain these kinds of curation methods, but you can talk to the Wiki community and see what's state of the art this year. It changes from time to time, or pull in other research or tools to do these kind of things. But for example, I told you about the Wikisite project. If somebody has been publishing papers, research papers in a particular field, and then you see a clinical trial where the person, J. Smith, is doing research in that field, then perhaps that's supporting evidence for you to make the connection that the same person who was the author of those papers is the leader in this clinical trials. Or perhaps you can bring in clinical trial identifiers that were mentioned in the academic papers and they're mentioned in the clinical trial records. Then you can make the structured data connection in Wikidata that this paper is about this clinical trial. Other kinds of entities that need to be disambiguated, very often the original research records will say that the research happened in the Smith lab, but it won't tell you what institution was hosting the Smith lab. It could be at a university, and it would be ideal if it would just say University of Virginia Smith Lab, but often the original record doesn't say that. So if somebody looks up what is this lab and then starts to disambiguate it through the Wikidata records, then you can start running interesting queries like show me all the research at the University of Virginia. If you did this on the US government website, it would only return the results that explicitly say University of Virginia. Whereas if you do this in Wikidata with disambiguated records, even if the record only said Smith Lab and it never said the University of Virginia, when it's disambiguated, then Wikidata will give you the correct results. You can't do this kind of cleanup process in the government website. They don't allow anyone to edit. But in Wikidata, anyone can edit, and you can clean these things up. Language translation. I'm not going to say much about how this works. I'm going to say there's language translation communities in the Wiki platform. You might ask, why would people want clinical trial records or anything else that's not in English language? It seems like all the researchers speak English and no one's translated these before. And also it seems like a big mess to translate them. So why should we do it? And of all platforms that do it, shouldn't it be the World Health Organization or some such thing? Why would it be the Wiki community that organizes this? The reality is the World Health Organization nor any other organization is doing this. The Wiki community has a particular interest. We're actually community stakeholders. We have people who have a stake in getting access to this information. Clinical research happens all over the world, and even when it happens in countries where the people don't speak English, the clinical trial records are only in English, and so the community of people who are volunteering to be in this research, they can't actually even read the research records that pertain to them. There's a lot of other injustice happening. I don't think this is fair. I think that if a pharma company or any other researcher goes into a country, they should make all the information available to the people who participate in the research. Now's not the time to really have the debate or the discussion about why we're doing this, but I will tell you that the Wiki community just has a commitment to translate as much as possible into as many languages as possible. And we've done some pilot translation in Wiki Project Clinical Trials to translate some of the technical terms into a few other languages. Of course, we're not complete. Of course, we didn't do all the languages. Of course, we need a lot of help. These are complicated medical terms. But at least we have a pilot here, and other people can build upon that or replicate this for their own projects. Last thing I'll say about the curation process is this bit about remixing information or adding completely new information. Sometimes this is kind of hard to recognize. When is it appropriate to bring in someone's completely new information, add it to a data set, or interpret the data set in a new way with information that's hard to come up with otherwise? I'll give you the example that we dealt with in Wiki Project Clinical Trials. The original clinical trials records, they often say that organizations are collaborators in some capacity, but they don't go into more detail about what it means to be a collaborator. We happen to find information, not exactly more than just notions or statements, but less than a data set, that there was a particular organization that when it participated in clinical trials as a collaborator, what it was actually doing was being a funder. That is, it wasn't designing the research, it wasn't overseeing the research. You shouldn't call them and ask them questions about the research, but they had a grant-making process in which they made funds available for people who went through their process to get money from them to conduct the research. So we clarified that when this particular organization was listed as a collaborator, its role was actually as funder. So that's adding new information. You couldn't have disambiguated that because it was clear that they were already in the record before. What we did is said that they were of a particular kind of relationship as they were participating in this trial. Where can we go from here? So a few things that I would like. I would like other people to feel encouraged and invited and welcome to set up wiki projects in Wikidata to do their own kinds of data integration and processing, curation, and these kinds of things. And I hope that by looking at the wiki project, watching this video, reading the paper, somebody can see, okay, here's the steps for setting up a wiki project. That doesn't seem like a big deal. I can estimate the amount of labor that it would take me to do that and achieve a certain result. And now I feel confident in doing that. So if you're a Wikipedian, it's not such a big deal. You already know this. Anyone can edit. You're very bold anyway. You can set up wiki projects, and I hope that what we did helps you clarify what are the essential parts of this and makes you feel confident in setting up your own wiki project. If you're not a Wikipedian, but you're thinking about contributing to the wiki platform, I hope that you can get a better feel for how many people it takes to put this together, what their time commitments are, what are the components you need, how to reach out to the wiki community to get support or ask questions or get comments on your draft of the wiki project. About the data itself, so we did the project. It's a model of a wiki project. That's very nice, but we also wanted to curate clinical trial information. There's so many places I would like to go with this. It's a very big data set. I'm just a researcher at a university. I'm not a multi-trillion-dollar pharma industry. The pharma industry has this data. It's closed data. They won't share it with anybody. I wish I had access to all the data sets they have, and I wish that I didn't have to reinvent all these things, but it's been decades already. I don't have access to all these closed commercial proprietary data sets. So by and by, we're trying to open them in different ways. The translation bit, I doubt that the pharma companies even have. This idea of making clinical trial records available to all stakeholder communities, it's very difficult to ask questions like, how many clinical trials has a given pharma company done in a certain country? And I think it's impossible. I don't think anybody's able to do this. Provide some information in the local languages. If we could get more translations of things like medical conditions, diseases, the names of institutions, and basic terms around clinical trials into more languages, then we would more easily be able to present this through the Wiki platform as a community project, peer-to-peer, with the people who are actually affected by these clinical trials. Other than that, I'd like to import more clinical trial registries. We imported the clinical trial registry for the United States, but there's 20 other registries indexed by the World Health Organization. Other countries have their own national registries. Some of these registries are not even in English language. So the Brazilian one is in Portuguese, China's is in Chinese language. The Korean and Japanese ones are in their local languages. And I think it would be useful to translate those into English and the English content into those languages, because obviously there's a research community that cares about getting content into their local languages. It'd be helpful to standardize these. The World Health Organization does not import the US records. They have imports of records of other countries, but it's hard to jump from United States records to records in other countries. So for example, if you wanted to say, I want to see clinical trials done in a given country, and I want to see every country's research, like if the United States is doing research in India, and also Japan is doing research in India, there's not one place online where a person can go to get this information. But if we imported it all into the Wikidata ecosystem as a neutral platform, then more people would have access to this kind of information. If you have questions, comments about this, the best place for you to post them is on the talk page of Wiki Project Clinical Trials and Wikidata. Otherwise, if you want to talk to me about anything, I'm here. I'm Lane Raspberry, user Blue Raspberry on Wikipedia. Thanks for hearing me out.